Okay, I want to talk with you tonight about healing for the wounded, really about wounds. We want to look at wounds because I believe that we all suffer from wounds. And so before I go to the next slide, maybe you can do that. Drop it in the chat if you like and tell me, what are wounds? When you think of wounds, what do you think of? How do they impact you? Have you suffered wounds? Like, what is it for you if you feel wounded by something? What is that for you? So I also have my chat up. It's not Sister Michelle alone, like when you have in the chat. You talk back to me tonight. Tonight is our talking through. So what are wounds for you? When you feel wounded, what does that feel like? How does it show up for you? And then we're going to look a little bit on what. It's interesting that I'm not, okay, now I'm finding my chat on my phone. Thank you. Okay, I see someone dropping that. Yes, disappointments, shame. That's it. And some are not visible scars. Yes, we're onto things here tonight. Hurt. Oh, hi, Reverend Verona, I see you. I didn't know you were in the room, but here we are. Hurt, yeah. So let's move into that to see, you're all on it. You have been saying that this is what wounds are. So some time ago, being drained. Yeah, some time ago, I came across a quote that really resonated so well with me because I felt that it said it. The author is unknown. I, did a lot of research to find out who came up with this, and everywhere it was about the author is unknown. But the quote says, if you don't heal from what hurt you, you'll bleed on people who didn't cut you. And I thought, wow, that is exactly what I want to talk with you about tonight in this space. Those are the things that you have experienced in your life that continue to make you bleed into relationships that you have now, bleed into situations and spaces where you are in your life. And the persons who are experiencing and getting the impact of these things are not the people who hurt you. But you see, if the wounds, if that cut was not healed, then it's going to continue to bleed. And so we all bleed at different times in our lives. Some of us bleed from a minor cut. And I definitely put that in brackets here to say, those are persons who probably are a little bit more sensitive, or maybe they've had so many cuts in their lives that what we consider a minor cut is a huge thing, a big thing for these persons. And then there are other persons who don't seem to be moved a lot by little things. They don't frequently sweat the small stuff, but they may have had some major injury in their lives. And we're talking about wounds, we're talking about hurt, we're talking about being drained, we're talking about wounds that are not visible, we're talking about rejection, we're talking about disappointments and shame, we're talking about those wounds and things like that. And I want us to recall and to think carefully about this piece, because may this stay before you throughout this presentation, but even after this moment, that our wounds look differently. So, I find that sometimes we get really impatient with others, or we get judgmental with others about the wounds they are experiencing, because we think, oh, if you knew what I went through, like, you wouldn't be creating a frenzy over something. And we form judgments of persons. But remember that our wounds look differently because we're coming from different places, right? We've had different experiences. Persons may get into a panic over something when for you it's a breeze because you've passed that way. You've had more major injuries in your life. So that little thing is not an issue for you, but that little thing is a mountain for someone else. And so bear in mind that our wounds look differently. We bleed differently. We wear those hurts differently. And so getting along or moving through relationships with anyone in any space, in our homes, in our workplaces, in just community, in the church, wherever we are, in all our various contexts and varying contexts, wounds are different. And so wounds come from different spaces. We have physical wounds. Those are the wounds that we see the literal mark. Those are marks that show. And I think it's Ashley who said it here in her explanation, dropping her phrase or so, is that some wounds are not visible scars, right? And that's true. So we have the physical ones where you may have a literal mark to show, whether it was the physical abuse, or you literally had someone hurt you in that way, or you had a major accident in life that you're left wounded from that. You're left always remembering that wound, like, you know, that my own feet. There was a wound I had on one leg that, so each time, depending on my shoes, that one foot will always feel tighter or closer or more closely fitted than the other, because I had a wound, a physical wound on one leg that leaves that little part of my heel a little bit more, maybe protruded a little bit more, or at least it's a little bit more sensitive because it's right on that bone of my heel, or whatever it's called now. But that physical literal mark may be there for someone, and they will always remember where that came from. They may remember the trauma surrounding that. For me, it was that moment that made me realize that my entire dream of being this nurse or this doctor, of working in the medical field, it was that wound, that physical wound, that made me realize, oh, I would have a lot of working to do on myself, because I only found my heel in a pool of blood. And I didn't even feel it until I noticed it was in a pool of blood. And I literally was trying to run away from the blood, not realizing it was on me, it was following me. So it was still there. And that was where the impact was. It wasn't even so much about the pain. So, you know, wounds can be physical, and they will remind you of what you've been through. And then there are wounds that are mental. And your mind keeps replaying the wound. It's like music on replay. It's ruminating constantly about this. It's that wound that makes you feel confused. It's that wound that makes you maybe now in your life so indecisive about things, because your mental wound was so much that your whole thinking pattern shifted in such a way that you feel insecure, you feel so very conscious about yourself. Mentally, you don't feel like you're capable of making decisions because maybe you were told that you can't. Maybe your wound came from the fact that someone kept hammering that at you. Oh, you're so indecisive. You're so slow at this. You are so, oh, I can't be bothered with you. Oh, you take forever. Those are mental wounds that hit people, that every time you enter into a space, whether it's to choose a meal, whether it's to order at McDonald's or Tim Hortons or Burger King or wherever, because you may not be very familiar. And maybe you're the person who will just stick to that one thing somebody told you about, because your mental wounds are so deep that you're afraid to try to change it, lest someone says you're indecisive, because your wound is showing up even in that way. Maybe you were rushed all your life, and that's a wound that you've never stopped to just pause, to breathe, to relax, to make a decision without feeling some sense of pressure. So even in ordering a meal, even if you're at your computer ordering something online, you get into that space where you're so confused and you feel flustered and you feel indecisive, because that wound is coming from somewhere else. It's not Amazon that's causing you, or Shein, or wherever you shop, Roseby or whatever. It is a wound that's coming from somewhere else. It's the wound you feel in conversations where you feel like you have to hurry up because somebody's always telling you to just get over with it anytime now. mental wounds that spill over into so many other places in your life. And then there are emotional wounds. These are the ones you continue to feel the impact of from wherever that wound is, right? Whether it were the physical, the mental, it brings this feeling over you that controls you, and you sit with that wound where sometimes the wound is just this consistent stage and phase of sadness. You're always sad. There seems to be no joy. Some people have lost their smile, their laughter. Sometimes for those persons, it's this anger that comes in its place, and you feel like, where is this coming from? I don't know. Why am I so irritable so easily? Why do I lose myself into this, it's almost like you're always in an argument. It almost feels like you have to be yelling and upset. It's almost like you don't know how to converse without having this embedded irritability and anger. And it doesn't take much to bring it out. It's like it is just below the surface of any conversation for you. The minute something shifts, or the minute something goes off that you don't want to hear, or you can't tolerate, or you don't feel like you want it, that wound is the one that's just hurt again, and it is coming from somewhere else, and it is just resting there in your emotions, and it's always there. And then we have spiritual wounds as well. And by the way, the mental and the emotional wounds are the ones that over extended period of time, over years, they're the ones we call psychological wounds. Because now they're not just as something that happened a few months ago, or 6 months, 3 months, maybe just a year ago. They've been in your life for so long that they've created psychological trauma. And the spiritual wounds are the ones that are so embedded deep in our spirits. They come from our thought system or belief systems, what we were told, how we were trained, how we were raised. It's a spiritual thing. It's a being thing. And when I say spiritual, it's not just about church here. It's spiritual. It's your relationship to the spiritual realm and being even of God himself. It's that thing that your spirit is that which drives you. Your spirit is that which gets up each day and decide it's motivated to keep going. And that wound is embedded so deep within the inner recesses of your being, of who you are as a spirit man, that maybe you feel stuck. You can't progress. You feel like your life is capped. It's just capped. It's like when you put a lid on something, and it's almost like you can't break forth from it because you feel like change. We played the song earlier, if you've got chains, he's a chain breaker. And that is spiritual wounding. And people are wounded from church. People are wounded because the scripture is used to beat you at home. It's a whip. It's a weapon. It's used to beat you in your faith. It's used to tell you will become nothing, maybe because of ancestral heritage or whatever it is. Your spirit man has learned that since you were little, since you could understand words, it's in you, and it's difficult to break from you. And it forms a bigger thing because it moves into your thinking pattern, and you act from that place of restriction. You act from that place of limitation. But what happens to us with these wounds? What's the impact of this? And wounds come from factors that are, I've talked about this, hereditary factors. And those are important because there are some things we already have come to the game with. We already are born with. We already inherited from the period of our mother's pregnancy to the time we are here. Those are things we can't just change. Those are not things we readily see because that's what we know, that's who we are. And some of those things we already come with, like being hypersensitive emotionally. hypersensitive, we're so anxious and so on. A lot of those things come, you can see those things in newborn babies. You can see those things in young toddlers. They're not just learned from you in that moment. They're born within the system, what was going on and how we continue to treat them. They're wounds that come out of our developmental issues, you know, that impede us. Were you born with some kind of handicap? Were you already born with, you know, impediments in various ways? And those things are wounds that sometimes will continue to crowd you. You feel capped by these things. You feel like you are boxed in because of certain things that you cannot change. You know, think of persons who are wounded with FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome disorders, that because, you know, parents, their moms drank, maybe didn't even know they were pregnant, and the impact of the alcohol on the kid. And so there are wounds that people are born with that create all kinds of hypersensitivity to various things. They're wounds that come with the package of what we were born with. And so hereditary, we have come already with some things, right? And we also look at environmental wounds, those that are part of the nurturing prospect, but also wounds that come from natural disasters and mishaps. You know, as a child, maybe the trauma of watching your family home go up in flames, or the family home impacted by hurricane, and you remember losing everything. You remember the fear. You remember how scared you were when the roof went off. Maybe the impacts of motor vehicle accidents. The fear you continue to experience every time you sit in a moving vehicle. Those are environmental stuff that have wounded people and have caused various limitations. I work with clients who struggle because of the very motor vehicle accidents that they've had, and their fear and anxiety are just so huge. Those emotions are so much that they just are afraid. I mean, just getting into a car, even if it's parked, is a lot of systematic desensitization that we have to go through, systematic in that little steps, you know, shaping the behavior to get over those kinds of wounds, because they create PTSD, they create post-traumatic stress disorders in people. And those are things that many times we have no control over, just the mishaps of life. So wounds come from different places, right? And then we have wounds that are also relational wounds. And I think these are the ones that, more than anything, create such deep impact on persons. The relational wounds that come from family members, the relational wounds that come from people around you who have belittled you or criticized you all your life, wounds that go deep. I told you about, and for some persons use the wounds to stand on as a platform to say, because you've done this or said this, I'm going to prove you wrong. And so persons have used wounds in a way from the impact to move themselves to a place of healing. But not everyone. Remember, we said, however we were born, some of us were a little bit more hypersensitive than others. Some already have difficulty moving away. We respond differently to crises and impacts and wounds. And it's the same way. Someone may tell you something that challenges you, and you are driven to prove them wrong. That is your healing. Your healing comes from the challenge. And then there are others who, the minute that word hit, they are sunken for life. Hard to get up, can't bring themselves beyond it. And I, as I was about to say, I told you about the neighbor who had told my mother that none of her children would come to anything. She and her patchwork children, and none would come out to anything in life. And it was like spite, or God was really just smiling. The very night his own daughter being pregnant, heavy pregnant, went into labor, having an epileptic episode, and it was the same woman and her patchwork picking them. My same mom, all of us who had to get up in the middle of the night to run to help, to get car. My mother was with her with the hospital. And I thought, what are the odds of that? Those wounds that you hear. And this is, I'm not talking about setting the comfort and the whisper of our home. It was a big cuss in the community. And for him, it was that, oh, my mom at the time, she had her 5 girls. We would never become anything. That was what he felt, and that was what he spoke, and that was what people thought, because that was a family that when they spoke, people felt like because they had some money or whatever they had, or by whatever means they got it, like they had some kind of a sense of, I don't know, maybe status in the community. And yet every single one of us came out of that. It's what you use your wound for. Will it impact you? Yes. Could it challenge you to prove otherwise? And I remember clearly as young as I probably was more than 6 or 7 years old. But I remembered that. And I knew I was going to prove that neighbor wrong. And maybe if you're like me, you are driven by what someone said. And someone called me dunce. And it felt funny because, like, you know, it was at a stage where I thought I had already accomplished so much. And I still went on to write my book after that. And it became a bestseller in so many different categories, nothing to do with me, but the goodness of God, at least in Amazon categories. So, you know, it's what you do with the wound that someone creates for you. And what you do with it is coming from deep inside you, that spirit man we talked about, that is probably capped, limited, already beaten up, sunken. And it takes work to bring that wound to a place of healing. But it's not just family members who may belittle you and make you feel, or just the neighbor around you. Sometimes there is the relational piece from your professional life. Colleagues who hurt you, colleagues who have put you down, colleagues who've used terms and references to you that have made you feel like you don't even belong, like you have nothing to offer in your career or your workplace. So it's familial kinds of wounds, and it's also professional kinds of wounds that you may experience. And there's also the vocational wound. And we can't ignore that there are persons who continue to feel wounded in their vocational choice, in their career choice, because maybe you feel incompetent in what you're doing. You feel like this square peg in a round hole. You feel uncomfortable with that career. And whatever causes you to feel that discomfort, maybe that's the wound. It's coming from so far. Maybe you were driven to do this, or you were forced into it. Because there's some persons who end up in a career path wounded for life in that they hate it. So every single day you get up doing this. This is where you spend most of your waking hours. And you're doing something that you hate. And I'm not talking about the workplace. I'm talking about the actual job, the actual work, the actual thing that you do, which is a career choice. Because you were forced into it. Someone expected you to live their dream. Someone never became the lawyer, the doctor, the whatever, the nurse, the teacher, the psychotherapist. Someone never became that and forced you to be that. And so that is a wound you're still living with because you hate your life. You hate going to work. Even if it's a great organization, you hate it because you end up in something that you were forced into. Or maybe you're in a career that you struggle with in this sense because it's your choice. It's what you love. It's what you feel passionate about. It's what you feel drives you. But you've been criticized for it. You've been ostracized for it. You've been isolated for it. You've been put out for it. You've been cussed out for it, whatever it may be. So there are also vocational wounds. And those come from places of, you know, sometimes it's a lack. Sometimes it's something you want to do, but you were never encouraged to do it. It was shut down in you before you ever even attempted to do it. And those are wounds. Every time you see other people in that field or in that work or doing something or expanding, you feel that hurt. You talk about how you've always wanted to be, but no one supported you. No one was there for you. And those wounds are coming from far and they spill over into your life. They spill over into your current relationships. They spill over into your relationship with your spouses and your children. They spill over into relationship with your colleagues because you are in a place where you are not at peace with yourself. And this is what we're going to get to right here. Wounds can be external. They're inflicted by others on you, whether it's what they said to you, how they said it to you, what they did to you, how they did it to you, or the wounds are internal. And a lot of us suffer from wounds that are internal. And these are the ones that are self-inflicted. The self-hate, the self-sabotage. Every time you're to do something or achieve something, you find an excuse. And there are 1,000,001 excuses every time. First, it was the rain. Then it was the car broke down. Then it was the sun too hot. Then it was the time of day. Then it was the neighbor who called you at the same time. Then it was Dick, Tom, and Harry. Always an excuse. That is the self-sabotage. That's the internal wound that many of us continue to inflict on ourselves. The imposter syndrome, that voice that keeps telling you, you cannot, you will not. And that wound is coming also from external. But when you bring it in and the voice is telling you and you're like, yeah, because that's what the neighbor had said, or yeah, my mother told me I would never achieve that, or I couldn't, or oh yeah, my father had said, or yeah, I remember the teacher who taught me said I could never. And those are wounds. Those are wounds that halt you and make you deny who you are in truth, because you have lived so long and have come to believe them. I remember in grade 10 in high school, and I loved to write, and I would read, Harley Quinn, Mills and Boone, all kinds of magazines, anything available. I loved to read it. And I always had this imaginative mind about stories and plots and how they should end, and this imaginative world. And I remember in grade 10, when I wrote an essay, we were given a sentence to either begin the essay with or to finish the essay with. And I remember when it was something about no one usually survives after falling from this height. And we were to start the story with it or ending. Never forgot that story, because I was surprised. I wrote this story. I was at my best. I was in my element. I was in my imaginative mind. I felt such a great orator of a story. And my teacher marked it and said, oh, I would have given you, I think she gave me something like 7 out of 10. I would have given you full marks if it didn't sound so bookish. It's like perfect. It's like something already published. Well, maybe she spoke that into being. And I was so wounded by that. I thought, where would I find this story to write, to copy this? I didn't even know anything about plagiarism or finding story. There was just always a story in my mind, a plot. I enjoyed writing, and speaking things in my head, but that was for me. And I just thought, here's my opportunity. And she just shut it down in that way. It sounded a little too bookish, like perfect. And I thought that's what you wanted. And it was confusing. And for a while, I would not write or speak anything in school. And in 11th grade, I was forced to, and I say forced because, you had these inter-house competitions, and they wanted debaters for the house, and I wouldn't speak. I was not interested in anything public speaking or writing, because it's going to sound too bookish. Nobody's going to believe it's mine. It's my story, or it's my own writing. And I remember I was forced to do this debate because they needed one more person. And I said, I don't want to do it. And they said, yeah, we don't have a choice. Just be the third person or fourth speaker, whatever it was. And so on the team. But as we put the pieces together, everybody went home and did their piece for this debate. And when we brought the pieces together to see who would be first speaker or second and so on, they said my script needed to be first speaker to set that tone. And I didn't know. I was like, okay. I am so shy and afraid to speak because this is the same English department that that would be the judges, and the teacher already shut me down. But somehow when I spoke in that debate, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes in, I found my groove, and I was so convincing. I convinced myself about what I was speaking about. And I became the speaker in that debate in high school. And that for me was like a confirmation in that moment that, well, if your essay was so good, the teacher thought it was bookish. Now, your debate, your best speaker for the entire series, not just that moment, but for the entire debate series that we had in that period of time. I thought there must be something about me writing and being able to speak, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this whether they believed it or not, whether anybody else believed it or not. It was a wound that was now moving into the healing process because I decided to no longer believe it because life showed me something otherwise. And that's where I stopped self-sabotaging and realized that there was something there that I didn't need to believe that one teacher's story. So whether or not the wounds were inflicted by someone else or they were self-inflicted, they can scar you. They can scar you deeply and for a long time. People who told you you'll be nothing. People who told you that, oh, without me, you'll be nothing. You won't achieve. And you believed it because your spirit man accepted it because maybe somewhere when you were 5 or 6 or 7, someone else said that to you, and it became almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you began to live like it. You began to live like that. And so wounds can traumatize people. And a trauma is considered to be that deep shock or pain that impacts the person from the injury that caused the wound. It shocks your system in such a way. And of course, for some persons, the shock is short-lived, but sometimes, unfortunately, it can scar you for a long time. It wound you for a long time, and you've never gotten over that trauma. And the trauma can be someone's words against you, but that trauma can also be someone's action against you. Someone did something to hurt you, to make you feel like nothing and no one. And you've never lived beyond the time since you were 5 years old. Kids who've been touched inappropriately. You know, they are scarred for life. And I say that recognizing the posture from which I say that, because you get moments where you feel that the wound is healed and there's still that scar, but it surfaces and it's a fight for the rest of your life. Can you be healed from it? Yes, but it's a continuous fight. It's like dressing that wound every single day for your healing, because it stays in the memory. It resurfaces when something similar shows up. Maybe it was at 5 years old, 7 years old, but here you are at 47, 57, 37, and you're like, wait, you weren't even aware. You didn't even remember those things happened to you, but they surface because our systems, the shock, will repress it, will repress those things in you that your whole mind forgets it. And then somewhere 30 years later, it shows up and you begin to remember, and it's a wound that shatters. So when persons speak negatively over you or acts negatively towards you or abusive towards you, it wounds you. It wounds you, and it creates a shift in your whole thinking pattern. It creates a shift. And that imaginative world of carefree, life is a bliss, and all of that is now taken from you, and it's dark, and it's gloomy, and it's painful, and it's hopeless, and there's now a limit on you because you never feel like you can move beyond it. Why do you think Isaiah 54:17 talks about the power in this so much? No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises up against you in judgment, we condemn it. If you don't condemn it, there's no healing moving from those negative things you were told. You're worthless, you ugly, you this, you that. Those are things that wound people. Wound you. Doesn't matter what you put on, how people, the world tell you it's beautiful. It's difficult to move from that low self-esteem and image because it was thrown and wounded on you by someone. Someone said something at some point and it took root. And I know it's been 40 years and 30 and 50, 60 maybe. And it's hard to go away if you never heal from what cut you. And you will bleed on people who didn't hurt you. So your response to the wound will determine how long before you begin to heal. If you fight back in your spirit, your healing is faster. If it knocks you out so cold that you sit in that, playing it over and over in your mind for years, what that person said, what that person did, then that wound is as fresh today as it were 15 years ago. Very few wounds do not leave scars, very few. And Ashley said it, some are not visible. Very few wounds do not leave scars. You get a wound and sometimes the doctors are so good or whatever is used to treat it, it's so good, you know, in the physical that you hardly get a scar. But most wounds will leave scars, and scars are a necessary sign of healing. Don't be afraid of your scars. Scars are a sure sign that healing has taken place for the wound, right? So imagine those of us walking around with 30 years of wounds, no scar, because healing has not taken place. You know, the scar comes, that little scab that comes on, and that wound must get better. And sometimes that little spot is still there. And it reminds you of where you got that. And for some persons, even with the scar continues to make them live in the moment of 30 years when it happened. Or you can choose to embrace those as your stripes. Scars are an important leg of your journey. How you choose to embrace them will determine how you will wear them. They can be your stripes or they can be your shame and your reproach. But it's going to be a choice. Maybe you have to go through therapy to work through that wound, because every day you get up and you see that scar, you remember how you got it. You remember somebody mistreated you. You remember that you felt it. Maybe you're even still living that fear, that emotion you experienced in that moment because that wound was so deep. And you continue to live in the shame and the reproach. But scars are important for your journey. And maybe in order for you to surely see the scar differently, is that you need to work through it. Get some therapy, talk it through, process it. You need to heal from what cut you. You have to heal from that. Or you're going to continue to bleed for another 15 years. You're going to continue to bleed for 10 more years on the people who are now coming into your life in a different dispensation. They don't know you. They don't know your past. They don't know your history. And they're getting all the anger since you were 10 years old. They're getting the anger now from what somebody did 5 years ago. And they don't even know anything about it. But scars are important they indicate that healing is possible. The same physical scar shows that some wound has been healed. So even the scars, emotional, mental ones, they indicate that healing is possible. So how do we heal and treat the wound that we've been carrying? What that person did. how they misused you, abused you, violated you, the things they said to you that made you feel worse than a dog. They made you lose your sense of self. You feel so invisible. You feel like nowhere and at no time in your life can you be of any impact or worth to anyone because they've classed you in such demeaning ways. How do you heal from that? How do you treat that? And one of the first things you have to recognize is if you don't accept that you're carrying a wound, if you don't know that thing, that's why you're so riled up over that glass that broke right now, because maybe when you were 7, you broke a glass and somebody whooped you so badly that you have scars from it. That no, if it breaks from you, you are still in a panic and a frenzy and even little things like that. We don't even recognize how these wounds are coming from far. You have to first accept that you are struggling with something. And if you don't know that there's a wound there, that you're still piling other things on, then you won't know that you need to get it looked after. It's a gangrene by now. It's cancerous to your body by now. And you still can't see that you need to get it looked after. You keep bleeding on people who come into your life and are trying to help you, but you can't see the good in them because you can't trust anyone. You don't even trust yourself. You self-sabotage and you sabotage everyone else in your life because your wound is so deep. So you have to first accept, and then you have to be ready to change. It's one thing to accept. But when someone accepts something, the next move is change. I accept, and therefore I want to change something. And there are persons, just some mistake, can't change. Well, if that's who you are and that's what you want to live with, then that's a wound you're going to live with, and you will chase everyone from around you. But if you're ready to change, knowing you have a wound, it doesn't mean that you can fix it. You know, sometimes it's a physical thing, you can't fix it anymore. But you know what? You're saying, I want to change. I want something to be different, and I want to work at best at this, as best as I can at it, so that I can change something. So you have to accept something is wrong, and then you have to move towards changing it. You have to look at that internally. What is it that I need to change? What is it that I keep doing? What is the cycle I keep repeating? Because now it's a pattern. It's the pattern of behavior. And that's how we assess in therapy. That's psychotherapy is about that. It's really about formulating, and we look at patterns of behavior. So that was what happened at 5. And it showed up again at 9. And then we're seeing it here at 15, but it's still showing up at 35. It's a pattern of behavior. And so part of what gets in the way of people changing is the belief and the thought. What is the belief that's keeping that wound there? Why is that wound working for you? What is it about that thought or the belief that makes you want to hold on to it? Because some people don't want to give up on that wound because it's a crutch. Maybe it's a crutch that everybody's afraid of you. So you're defensive and angry, and you like that everybody's afraid of you, and you're going to die lonely because everybody's afraid of you. I'm just going to give you the fact. But it makes you feel powerful and in charge and in control in the moment, because maybe at 5 you had no control. Someone took that from you. And it's okay that you had to develop that defense, But you can't continue to live with that for the rest of your life that way. You have to work through that and recognize that one person hurting you is not the entire world about to get you. It's just one person. That one person. And they deserve your anger, and they deserve your pain and lashing out. How about the others? For so many years who've come into your life and have tried to show you love and care and understanding and sensitivity, but you're not able to even believe it because your wound is still there. PTSD by now. It's traumatic, psychological for you. Another hindrance to your treatment is not just your belief and your thought, but it's the emotion. It's how it makes you feel will determine if you want it to heal. Right? So if you feel like you strut your stuff, that you got all your whole control around here, why would you want to be healed from that? But when you're by yourself and you're lonely and isolated and you feel miserable because no one wants to be around you, then you realize, I don't like the way it makes me feel and there's something I need to change. So if your wound is a crutch, that's working for you. Well, you don't need to give it up. But if it's not working for you, then you need to ask yourself, what function does it serve? What is the function that it's serving me right now? If you have everything you need, you're happy in life, you probably don't have any need for God. That's why many people still don't believe in God. But on the other hand, those of us who've been empty and have felt torment inside and recognize our lack and our nothingness, we recognize that we're nothing without him. Recognize that we are like the grass. We pop up today and it cut down tomorrow. Then we recognize we're nothing without him. And that's why we have a need and a desire inside to change. So the point I'm making with that is that if you don't feel there's a need to change, then you won't accept change. You won't seek for help and you won't introspectively pause to do that. Let me wrap this up quickly, just to say though, how do we prevent or how do we caution ourselves from these wounds that come to us? Because some of them we had no control. But where you are right now in life. So 10 years ago, maybe you were voiceless. Maybe you didn't know how to speak up. You had no boundaries. People wounded you in ways that you didn't know any different. You didn't know any better. But here you are. 10 years later, 20 years later, maybe even 5 years later. You know what? Even 2 years later, here you are, a year later. How do you caution yourself from those wounds coming to you now to immobilize and to cause mayhem and pain in you? And it's to protect yourself. You have to protect yourself. You have a responsibility to look out for you. No one else will do that as a priority. You have to look out for you unless you're a kid. Unless you're a little child that should be protected by parents and elders. But otherwise, if you're an adult, you have to be responsible to look out for you. You have to care for your own well-being, your own support, your own that comfort, your own lifeline. You have to prioritize you. And maybe you need to set boundaries. And we recognize that spiritually, we put on the whole armor of God so that we can stand against the devil's schemes. That's what Paul writes about. That we can stand against the devil's schemes. The schemes will come, but you have to set up your barbed wire, your concrete wall, whatever it is, whatever boundary, your door, your grill, there must be something that you will need to now decide in your life. Okay, 20 years ago, I did that. I'm not doing that. That wounded me too much. And I'm going to put some structures and boundaries, and I can do that respectfully. Sometimes it's just learning to say no. And no is a full sentence. I want to reiterate that in every way. You don't need an explanation. No, to protect your peace of mind and to cause you to not be harmed and wounded again. No is a full sentence, period. Right? So we put on the whole armor of God to protect against the enemy. And putting on that armor is going out in wisdom every day. I have a choice that I will not just sit and be allowed to be wounded today. I will speak up. I will use my voice. I will not self-sabotage. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get up, dress up, show up. I'm going to slay the day. You have to decide. You have to decide that. It's also important that you avoid your triggers. Avoid your triggers. You keep walking in the valley of the shadow of death, saying that you will fear no evil, and you keep going in the very place or to the very people that continue to trigger you. They make you vulnerable. Every time you're around them, you're going to cuss bad word or get this close to a point where you're going to lose your mind. And you swear, and every time, Lord, I promise myself, I'm not going to let anyone let me. You're going into the place where you continue to be triggered. Surround yourself with things that foster your growth, and you need to learn to shed. One of the beautiful things about even God's creation is that the trees shed so they can replenish. Trust me, if you shed the things and the people that trigger you and are no good for you, the Lord will raise up new leaves and branches. You have to put this kind of caution in place, or you're going to keep wounding yourself. And the wound keep leading you to the same, it's like a trauma bond. All you know is the wound, so you keep bringing the same kind of people who are going to do the same thing to you all over again. 50 years later, you are still being hurt in the same way. Why do we need 100 times to learn the lesson? Avoid the triggers. If it look like it, you don't need no prayer over that. You have to love some people from afar. And that's why the scripture says, if it be possible, live at peace. If it as much as lieth in you, as much. So sometimes what lies in me is that I love you at arm's length. That is even a legal term. I love you at arm's length, and I'm okay with that. I'm happy to love you at arm's length, because the trigger may be if you get too close, it becomes a trigger and it's another wound. You have to protect yourself. 2 Timothy 2:16 and 17, Paul was warning young Timothy to avoid worthless and foolish talk. That only leads to more godless behavior. He says this kind of talk spreads like cancer, as in the case of Hymenaeus and Philetus. He says their words eat as doth a gangrene. Some people, their words will eat like cancer in you, and they won't change, and you can't expect the change to come from them. You can only expect and control change that comes from you. I want to remind somebody about that. You have no power to change anybody except yourself. So stop waiting to see the change in them. How about you look at the change in you? How about you start the change in you? Michael Jackson said it. I'm starting with a man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And so the wound, protecting yourself from these wounds, will be the change in you. A perpetrator, a child molester will always be that. The narcissist who continues to abuse you verbally will always be that. The change has to come from you. Anytime you get tired of being tired, then change will come to you. But if you never accept that this is a wound, then you will continue to live in it. Know who you are. Know who you are. You have to constantly remind yourself of who you are. And one of the, I'm going to say basic but most essential thing you can remember, if you are so important that Christ died for you, then tonight I want you to know you're good enough. You're good enough for anyone, and you're good enough for yourself, and you are worth it. You are worth it. Know your identity in Christ, that you are a chosen people. You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. You're God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. That's what 1 Peter 2:9 says. So tonight, as we go into the breakout rooms to talk a little bit about our wounds, things you've been sitting on, things that have paralyzed and crippled you. Or maybe why you're still there. Like, why are you still so stuck? Why is there such a limit on you? What is it that's in your spirit that has not made you feel you can move beyond that? Who said that? Whose voice is still in your spirit? Sit down and hush up. If you're comfortable with where you're there. Those are things that have crippled people and have always made them be satisfied with never achieving more. Yeah, it comes from scripture, but Paul says, I have had much and I have also had little. So it's not a limitation matter here, but either state, in my much or in my little, I can be content. Because you see, he knows that there's much he can still have. And that is the shifting now that needs to take place. So what wound are you nursing today? That's where I want to end this tonight. What is the wound that you are nursing? The thing that has kept you down. The thing that has made you feel like you're nothing and nobody. Who made you feel that? Who told you that? Who told you that? Who has shut you down for so long? Wow. What is the power they had over you for so long? And sometimes I know you remain with the wound because you are waiting for them. Notice the person, the oppressor, the abuser, the perpetrator, the one who has hurt. You're waiting for that person to come back and to say sorry to you. But you're at greater peace if you will find yourself at that place and accept that they may never. Your peace, your healing cannot be attached to someone else and someone else changing, because that is the one guarantee you do not have. So whatever it takes for you to work through it on your own with a competent professional, maybe a good bunch of friends, whatever it is that is your thing and you can afford and have scope to do, that is where your healing is going to come from. Because I can tell you, 9 out of 10 times, it's not going to come from the person who's hurt you. And maybe tonight, what you will hear in this room is for someone to say to you, they were wrong. And that's what we can extend to you from here. Those persons who've hurt you, they were wrong. They were wrong. And so in this space, even before we get into the rooms, I just want to say, for every man who has hurt you, forgive them. Forgive them for your sake. For every woman who's hurt you, can you open yourself to forgive them for your sake, not for them, for you? I ask for forgiveness on their behalf, that you can hear it, that you can hear someone say they were wrong. They were wrong to hurt you. They were wrong. The things they said to you were wrong. Every sense of the word, it was wrong. The things they did to you, whoa, how they made you feel, they were wrong. And I ask for forgiveness for them, for you, so that you can find freedom. Freedom in you to be healed from their wounds. Father, we thank you for what you've laid on my heart to share with your people tonight. Wounds, wounded soldiers in this room. And as we go into our breakout rooms to find even closer healing, maybe just for someone to hear their story, maybe just for someone to affirm them and validate them and reassure your people. We are all your people, broken, wounded, battered soldiers on the battlefield. Wounded by adults who should have known better. Wounded by strangers who took advantage of us. Wounded by family and siblings and friends and people we trusted. wounded by church, wounded by people using even your word, the scripture, to beat over our heads and to condemn us, wounded in so many areas of our lives. But we give every wound to you tonight. And we pray that you would cause that your people would find healing, even just the beginning of it, even in a small part, that the scars will begin to form because they're a sure sign of healing. And for those who are wearing scars, Lord, that they would no longer be afraid and ashamed and reproached by them, but that they will wear them with pride as their stripes, having gone through the fire and the battle and the storms and the chaos of the hurricanes and the challenges of life, and they've come through victoriously. We bless you, Lord, for being with us in this space. In Jesus' name, amen.